Turning savings into a retirement plan. We got a thoughtful question this week here on the podcast we're going to share with folks and see if it relates to your situation. So let's get into it this week here on Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts. Welcome into Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts with CPA and personal financial specialist Phil Putney. Now let's get rolling with today's show. Hey everybody, welcome into the podcast. Phil and I here to talk investing, finance, and retirement. Phil, we got a great question that came in through your website from Amanda, who had this interesting take on things. So I thought, let's just talk about that. We did this a couple of weeks ago with some, emails that come in, or somebody sends us something through the YouTube or through Facebook or whatever, right? So, they send those into you and your team. And it's, it's good to share it on the podcast because if it's happening to one person, it's happening.
Yeah, usually somebody else has a similar question.
Yeah, very similar situation, right? Yep. So really, she's talking about, I've been saving for retirement, but never actually made a plan. And that's just, a ton of people, right? So let me go ahead and do the whole question, and we'll put it up on the screen for folks as well as I run through this. But I've done a pretty good job saving for retirement over the years. She says, my 401k is in good shape, and I do have some other accounts too. But I realized I've never actually sat down and made a real plan. I don't know how to figure out what I'll need and how to turn those accounts and savings into income. So what are some steps to take? Where do I go from here? And so, Phil, I think that's where a lot of people, we have a collection of stuff.
Right.
What do we do with the stuff?
Most people have spent many, many years working kind of the nose to the grindstone, so to speak. They've done a good job saving, throwing it into the 401k, not paying a lot of attention to it, watching it, as it kind of goes ups and down, companies contributing to it too. They might have followed that old quite a few years ago now, the advertising campaign, what's your number, so maybe they've got a number in mind.
Oh yeah. They're sitting on the little bench and it was the what? Yeah.
What's my number, because that was the big thing for many years of, you got to hit this number before you can retire. That's kind of to this discussion.
It's funny how society changed. If you ask somebody what their number is now, they're not going to think you're talking about your financial retirement. And unfortunately, they're talking about something completely different. But anyway,
totally different number. Yeah.
Don't ask that question. So anyway,
but yeah, it's, really, your accounts are on track. That's good.
Sure.
But are they on track for your scenario really is the question. What the number is, how much you've accumulated is a factor.
Okay. Right.
And sometimes I'll get this from prospects as I'm going through that initial meeting. Well, kind of like, going to the doctor, doc, how do I look? Am I in good shape?
Right.
And they same thing. It's like, well, I think I've got enough. What do you think? It's like, well,
sure.
The amount isn't as relevant by itself as it is in comparison to the overall plan. And that's where she's hitting the point is that,
and I was going to say, it sounds like she's concerned about that, right? How do I turn the stuff into money?
Right. How do you turn it into money? But really at the end of the day, it comes back to then having a plan to know that her first question, is it enough? And confirm, maybe she does have enough, which is great. And I've had the privilege of, and this is one of my favorite parts with working with clients that, they'll come in and they're maybe a couple of years out from retirement and we go through the process and, they're thinking, I'm hoping I can do this in 2 years. And we run the numbers and it's like, you know what? You could actually retire today if you'd like.
Nice.
And that's a great discussion.
That's always fun. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, look, you have a bad day at work. You don't like how things are going. It's, it's the ball's in your court, so to speak, at this point.
Right. Is 2 years a good window? With you bringing that up, is 2 years enough time? Should people be?
I would say it's
5.
2 to 5. 2 is getting kind of short because there's not a lot of change you can do in 2 years.
Right. That's what I was thinking.
If you get 5 years out, you're a little closer. You've got a little bit more chance to make some changes. And kind of tying back into one of our earlier episodes too, having that 5-year window allows you to start to get assets positioned properly so that as risk happens, you're not in 2025 retiring and now I'm going to change things around.
Okay.
And have all my eggs in the high risk bucket. And, now I'm concerned because volatility's here and maybe it's going to take away 10, 15, 20% of what I have.
Gotcha.
So having the plan done ahead of time enough so that you can prepare for that long-term trajectory is important.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
I would say 2 to 5 years is,
Okay. So for somebody like Amanda with this question, maybe we start with a financial inventory, right? Do we,
Yeah, I
just
mean,
kind of start pulling all this stuff together. She says she has multiple things. So
right. So I mean, that's the first thing is understanding what you have. What tax buckets do they fit in, so to speak? That taxable, tax deferred, tax free. So you've got a clear vision of where things are at, what the rules are around each of those accounts.
okay,
So that's always where we start. And we use what we call our financial matrix, which lays out those accounts in those buckets.
mm-hmm.
But then it also lays out the accounts, and that's our rows. The columns that we have going across are now, soon, and later buckets.
Okay.
So it helps us get a picture and show the client a picture of, okay, here's how your assets are positioned. This much is in taxable. Here's how much is in tax deferred. Here's how much is in tax free. Are you too heavily weighted potentially in one of those? And that really becomes a long-term question to get answered as we start to do planning. But then we can start to also look at that risk positioning to say, is all the money you have really in that later bucket? And if you're 2 years out from retirement, then that's can be a problem if markets don't cooperate, which obviously none of us control.
Right. So, and then you kind of do the analysis and say, okay, what are you currently saving? What are you currently putting away? And do we need to make adjustments there? Right. So this is not quite enough, or, we're doing, whatever. Right.
Well, I mean, the next step would be envisioning what does retirement look like, right? I mean, because at the end of the day, there's the old adage, what is it? If you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there, right?
Sure.
What does it look like?
Or Yogi Berra, if you don't know where you're going, you'll end up someplace else.
You'll say, yeah, there you go. Yeah, I mean, you're going to go, I always say you've got a plan. It's a plan of either I'm just following kind of the default rules of, this is what security is. This is the IRS says I have to take money now.
Which is what Amanda's saying. She's like, hey, I've got stuff. I just don't know what to do with it.
Or you've got this plan you've developed. So the first step in that plan is give some thought to what retirement looks like to you. What is your goal from a spending standpoint? Do you have hobbies? Maybe you don't, but you've always wanted to, whatever it is. And that's a goal.
Sure.
And in this step, I would say dream bigger, right? Don't go crazy and say, all right, well, I've got 100,000 in my 401k.
Right.
And I want to take like a world cruise every year. Okay.
I think you're going small. You said, don't go crazy. I'm thinking I want to buy my own island and, but there's no way I could do that. Right.
Yeah. That is not going to happen. So be realistic with where you're at. But I mean, don't think, I don't know if I can spend that. I mean, if it's something that you think you could do and you really would like to do, then let's talk about it. And I always say, let's put it in the plan and see if it works.
Sure.
I mean, if it doesn't, then we can always have the discussion. Well, it doesn't work this way, but here's some options. Maybe if you really wanted to do that, whatever it is, it just means maybe you got to work a year or two longer.
Right.
Some things have to change.
Well, so is that around the income, Phil? Is it all around the income generated then by the multiple accounts to say whatever to accomplish the dreams and or work a year longer, 2 years longer, whatever that looks like? It's all around the income number.
Yeah, because I mean, our approach, investments are tools, right? So we know
Sure.
In the very beginning stages, I don't care as much about how they're invested because it's not as relevant right up front. It should have nothing to do with the plan. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
You shouldn't plan based on what specific investments they have. Some exceptions, I mean, if they're in an annuity and they're locked into the annuity, you need to understand that annuity and is it good for them to keep it? Does it have an income feature that you need to plan for? There's certain times you do have to consider it, but generally don't let the investments drive the plan. The investments are a tool to fulfill the plan.
Okay.
So that's why we do our buckets to begin with. In the initial planning stages, I don't care about the now, soon, and later. That comes later in the planning process.
Right.
What's important in the beginning is which tax buckets are they in? So the taxable, tax deferred, tax free, because that has the most effect on the long-term plan. And then it comes down to understanding income. Because I mean, that is what retirement's all about, right? I no longer work. I need X amount to live out this retirement, whatever it looks like. And now that I know that, now I know what my strategy is around Social Security. So when
because what accounts you're pulling from and how you're generating income is going to affect that. Right.
So it's not a simple. It can be, but if it's done right, in my view at least, the way we do it, it's not I would say a simple process, right?
Right.
There's steps you have to take. 4%. That's a general rule of thumb. I mean that doesn't play out always long term forever. And it's just Does it work type of thing. I mean, Social Security is a great great thing to discuss in that, because if I'm delaying Social Security, you might be pulling 5-6% early on, but if you're only doing that for 4 years because we've delayed Social Security, and then now later on we're turning on Social Security and now we're pulling out 3%, I'm good. It all works.
Okay.
You don't know that until you've run the plan. So that's why we always have to start with income. What do we need? And, whether and I always encourage, this is my base monthly, this is what I need.
Right.
If I have like vacations that I want to take, well, let's build that in, because, travel, maybe that's not going to continue all the way through retirement, but we're going to do a lot of travel the first 10 years, So my base level is 80,000 a year, whatever it is. I want to spend 20,000 extra a year for travel for the first 10 years. Previous show, we talked about supporting kids. I mean, if that's part of your plan, you build that in, whatever those numbers are. So you have a clear picture of, this is what I need. Now you can step to the inventory that you've built and start to build out a plan of, how do I make these assets generate that income that I need? And in that whole process, minimizing taxes.
The Tax Smart Retiree is your comprehensive guide to mastering tax efficiency for a flourishing retirement. You will find indispensable advice and actionable strategies designed to enhance tax savings, maximize Social Security benefits, protect against market volatility, and develop a customized retirement plan. To get your free ebook, click the link in the show notes of today's episode and download your copy of the Tax Smart Retiree right now.
And I was going to say, that's really kind of another piece too, is what kind of help do you need? Right. Because a lot of times we talk about the fact that there's so many kinds of advisors out there. And maybe you're talking with someone who is only interested in helping you accumulate the money. Well, that could be fine depending on your age. Or maybe you're talking with someone who's only focused in talking to you about, annuity products or something like that. So what kind of help do you need? And, taxation is obviously going to be a big component of this thing as well, which we talk about often. So, getting the right help is going to be fundamentally important. And I think I love how we're always kind of sharing that from both angles, because you're obviously concerned about the income side, but you're also concerned about the tax side.
Right. Well, I mean, so the income side to us is we're always looking at net spendable income.
Okay.
So we don't look at gross. Gross is irrelevant. What do you spend net, right? That's all that matters. What hits the bank?
Which I think is why they named it gross, because it's just gross.
And I mean, the point is, think of it this way. I mean, looking at the tax buckets, if I needed 80,000 a year to live on, well, if that money is in the bank, right, so to speak, there's no tax on that. So I just pull 80,000. It's pretty simple. But if I needed 80,000 and everything's in an IRA, well, now I've got to pull out, 100 and whatever to get my 80, depending on tax brackets and all the other things. So, I mean, it's a whole different formula, but we don't want to change what you need to live on. A plan done right shouldn't cause you to have to change things because we're doing something different in the plan. And this is a funny conversation often that I have with clients as we're having this whole discussion of doing Roth conversions and, repositioning assets and kind of prepaying down that mortgage. And they're like, well, I don't know if, if it's money going to be left anyways, and it's going to benefit the kids. I don't know that I want to do that. And oftentimes when we get into that discussion and dig a little further, it's because they're thinking that I'm asking them to spend part of their 80,000 a year to pay those taxes. I'm like, no. That's not how this works.
Okay.
This is your 80 is your 80.
Okay.
We're always keeping that. My goal is, does it make sense in the big picture to use other money to pay that down? You're still spending your 80.
Gotcha.
We're not changing that. So just having that discussion and perspective of how do you best position it. And then that's where it comes down to that income plan.
Yeah.
Now at the end of it, you should know that here's what I need, indexing it for inflation over time. Here's how much is coming from Social Security. If I'm delaying, well, how I'm going to fill that gap. What's going to get me the 3 to 5 years or whatever it happens to be. Do I have a pension? What options have I elected there? Is it single life, joint life? Did I take a lump sum? How does that play into it? And if, my income needs up here and the pension and Social Security are down here, well, how do I fill that gap?
Right. Yeah.
Now we come back to the investments. Now we know this is what we need. And out of the planning process, that's the next step for us, is once we've had all these discussions, figured out this is what they want, here's the net income, here's all the pieces, Now I know exactly what we need to plan for. Now we can come back and have that income plan to say, okay, based on the planning we've done up front, this is what the plan says you need. Here's the assets you have. This is how we would recommend structuring those to meet that need. And kind of bringing it all around, the way I always bring it back to a client is I say it's like building a house, right?
Sure. Yep.
You need to have the plan first, right? You've got to have a plan to know how you're going to build this. And you don't want to just start going to Home Depot and throwing things in the cart, which is right. From an investment world, kind of how people do it, right? I mean,
this looks good. That looks good.
They got this cart full of stuff and they're thinking, okay, well, how do I make this work?
Yeah.
It's no different than going to Home Depot and throwing a bunch of 2x4s and sinks and whatever, and just all these carts, and then dragging it out to the parking lot and say, okay, how do I build a house out of this?
Right. Well, I need nails, but oh wow, I didn't realize that there's 47 kinds of nails.
Right. Which one is the right one for my purpose? So.
Yeah. If you don't have a plan, you end up with the Winchester house. And if you're not familiar with it, go check it out. This lady, it's an interesting story, but she just kept building these rooms random, and they didn't lead anywhere sometimes and all sorts of weird stuff. But you got to have a strategy, right? You got to have a plan. You got to have an outline. And to Amanda's point, we'll kind of, bring it back to finish up the conversation. So I think a lot of people are in a very similar situation. We are going to work, we're doing stuff, we're collecting things, we have stuff. And then we just, at the end of the day, we go, okay, great. Now, what do I do with it? I mean, right. I know I can just go pull money out, but how do I do that as efficiently and as smartly as possible? And that's where a financial professional can help you.
Correct. Yep. So it starts with having a discussion, having a plan. At the end of the day, that'll come back to her original answer or question of, okay, do I have enough and how does this work? Right.
Yeah.
But
that'll help you solve that question. So as always, if, it's the first step is typically just going, what do I have and how do I do it? So if you need some help, inventory, some of the stuff we covered. So if you got, if you need some help, reach out to Phil or a qualified professional in your area. Now, so many advisors work with clients all over the country, so it's not really necessarily state or city or county specific, although certainly state, different laws factor into how things are done. But just check with a qualified professional in your area. Of course, if you need some help, reach out to Phil. The show link information is below. You can click on his website and get some time onto the calendar. You can reach out to him. We've got the number up on the screen. It's also in the information as well. So lots of good stuff to help you get started. Just find them online and get started today. And don't forget to subscribe to us on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. So we'll see you next time here on Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts. Thanks so much for the question, Amanda, and letting us share that with folks. Hopefully it helps some people along the way as well as yourself. And we'll see you next time here on the show.
Phil? Investment advisory services offered through AFS Wealth Management. The content of this program is provided for informational purposes only and is not a solicitation or recommendation of any investment strategy. Investments and/or investment strategies involve risk, including the possible loss of principal. There is no assurance that any investment strategy will achieve its objectives.